Hey guys, MetalJesus here. Now recently on my channel, I've been doing a series of videos covering PlayStation 2 games that we did not get in the US. Specifically, I've been covering a lot of PAL releases. And the reason I've been able to do that is because I've been borrowing my buddy Reggie's PlayStation 3 Test System. And it's because of those videos, I've been getting a lot of questions from people just wondering what the heck this thing is and what does it do. Well, we're gonna dive into that in this video because honestly, it's kind of the ultimate PlayStation 3. Let's take a look. So what is a PlayStation 3 test system? Well, it's primarily used by developers to test their games on final hardware, but this particular model has some really cool features that's also very attractive to game collectors like me. The PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2 were region locked. However, this particular test system will play PlayStation 1 games and PlayStation 2 games in all regions. It doesn't care about any sort of region locking. And then of course the PlayStation 3 itself and all those games was region free. So when you take into consideration that about 3,000 games came out for the PlayStation 1 worldwide, and then another 4,400 games came out for the PlayStation 2 worldwide, and then the PlayStation 3 has a little over 2,200 games released for that. That means this particular unit right here can play over 9,700 games. It's crazy. And because it was designed to connect to an HD television, all of those games output via HDMI, so they upscale and look beautiful, sometimes even with little extra filters added to make it look even better. And it's because of that flexibility, these units not only ended up with developers to test their games, but also some game reviewers and journalists, and I believe that's where Reggie got this. For the most part, this looks like a pretty standard PlayStation 3 menu, but if you go over here under settings and you go down to debug, you'll notice as I scroll through here, there are a ton of options you can mess around with. Now guys, I'm not a PlayStation 3 developer, but I did want to jump in here and show you some of the more interesting options, including right off the bat, look at this. They have the O button behavior, and I love this because you guys know that if you've ever played a Japanese game on, like, say, you know, a PlayStation 2, or I think even Metal Gear Solid does this, that in Japan, the select button is not the cross or the X. It's actually the O. And it can drive you nuts if you play a Japanese game and you're not used to that, because you'll be constantly, you know, backing out of what you intend to do. And so here you can actually set this to the way you want it to be. If you want the O to be enter, you can do that, or you can make it the back button. It's actually really cool. It's there. Check out this option called NP Environment. So did a bit of research, and basically this is a way of preventing your PlayStation account from accidentally getting banned by Sony if you put this online. So you actually can go into the keyboard and enter the word invalid, and then Sony reads that as an account that, oh, okay, they're a test, so don't ban them. Here is Game Output Sound Debugger, and if you go into the menu there, you see a bunch of options here where I guess you can force your game to mix down into a scenario where you can test with on different speakers and make sure it sounds correctly and it's mixed correctly. So that's kind of interesting because you could take a game that is, like, say in 7.1 and force it down into stereo or force it down into 5.1 and basically just create entire test scenarios to make sure, again, that everything is mixed correctly depending on how the end user would actually have their audio set up. Now, one thing that this test unit does not do is that it does not play Blu-ray movies at all. And I was really surprised to read this at first. I was like, that's bizarre. Why would they do that? And then off the menu, I see this, HD CP on or off. And I was like, oh. So what that does is it allows this to ignore the copy protection that would go over the HDMI cable. So that can be very useful if you want to capture gameplay footage or test gameplay footage and you don't want to have to mess with it. However, back when this first came out, Sony was very interested in selling Blu-ray movies, and this would have been a great pirate device had they actually allowed Blu-ray movies to play on this, because essentially what you could do is turn that off, put a Blu-ray movie in here, and then through your video capture a flawless copy of a movie. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So it's cool that you can turn it off, because that way you don't have to mess with splitters and things like that to capture gameplay footage. But the same token, this will not play Blu-rays at all. I even tested it. A couple other interesting options here are NP Debug, NP DRM Debug, and NP DRM Clock Debug. Now you can turn that on or off, the clock debug, and did some poking around, and basically this all has to do, of course, with DRM. That's basically digital rights management, and this is a way where you can, test it probably before actually going live and make sure that the game actually runs with or without it. But again, I'm not a developer, so I'm not 100% sure, but that's an interesting little option to mess around with. Here's something that I'm not sure what it's for. It's called Pad Auto Detect, and if you do some research online, people think it's for a paddle that you could potentially plug into the PS3, but I'm not aware of any paddle. And I was reminded off of the main menu that the PlayStation 3 supported the Vita, and I was thinking that maybe that back touchpad might be what that's referring to. I honestly don't know. If you are a developer and you've messed around with this, I'd love to know if that's what that's referring to, is when you have a Vita connected to your PS3. Speaking of handhelds, here's an option called Ad Hoc SSID Prefix and PSP. So this is when you connect your PSP, or I believe when you are testing your PSP games, because PSP, as you guys know, had the ad hoc multiplayer ability. So you could basically play, standing next to your buddy with another PSP, and you could multiplayer wirelessly. So I believe that's a way for this to emulate that, or at least do some testing. Also, check this out, Fake Plus. Now, I bet you that is probably so that a developer could test whether or not they have a PlayStation Plus account or not, which would determine whether certain things might be available to purchase in your game. That's a guess, but that probably sounds like what that was for. Fake Free Space. So that's kind of interesting. I suspect what that is where a tester can go in there and pretend not to have very much space on the hard drive, which would be very useful to know if your game would crash if it actually ran out of hard drive space, or if you wanted to test maybe downloading DLC or patches, and you wanted to make sure that your game didn't crash if it ran out of room. Here is Fake Save Data Owner. So I guess save games are tied to your PlayStation username. And I can imagine where a developer, when they're creating their game, also creates their own save files that they then share with the QA and test department. So those files would come over there, and then you could use this option to load pretty much any save, any save data that you've got, either from a developer or even from online. Like I mentioned, one of the best features of this device is that it runs 3 generations of PlayStation games regardless of the region. And when it comes to PAL games, that's especially tricky, because PAL games basically run at 50 hertz as opposed to North American and Japanese games, which run at 60 hertz. And with this test console, 99% of the time, when you just pop in a disc, regardless of region, it just launches and it works flawlessly. And so by default, this test console will just auto detect whatever region it's in and then just do what's necessary to get it to work. But when I was working on those PAL videos, there were a handful of games that didn't work for whatever reason. And so it was nice to be able to go into the settings and go down and manually set the region. And that basically solved all my problems. So because I was primarily playing a bunch of PAL games, I set them to Europe or the UK, and they just work flawlessly. Now, one thing that happened when I was using this that I didn't actually expect when using PAL games on it was that some games, when you launch them, they would bring up this option to potentially run the game either in 50 hertz, which it would normally do, or in 60 hertz, and sometimes you could even set the resolution. And so it's nice that the test system supports the different frame rates and any of the resolutions that these games may use. I guess what I learned from borrowing this is that, in my mind, it really is the ultimate PlayStation 3. It plays 3 generations of PlayStation games across every region, over 9,000 games. It's amazing. But I need to point out, because I know a lot of you are going into the comments to say it, and that is you can get a lot of this functionality if you put custom firmware on some of the early models of PlayStation 3s that you could buy at retail. But that's not the focus of this video because I've never actually done it myself. I've seen it and it actually does look pretty cool. It does look a little tricky though. You have to be a little tech savvy to make sure that you don't brick your PlayStation 3. And as far as I can tell, it doesn't work with every model. But what I love about the test system is that it's from Sony. I mean, it's just basically plug and play and it just works. So if you're able to get your hands on one, they definitely seem like they're pretty cool. All right, guys, I'd love to know what you thought about this video down in the comments below. And as always, I want to thank you for watching my channel. Thank you for subscribing. Thank Reggie for letting me borrow it, and take care.